What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a simple morning interview, only to face an ambush of personal attacks and condescending questions? It only took 46 seconds for Savannah Guthrie to turn a friendly conversation into the most explosive moment in Today Show history. Kevin Costner walked onto the set that morning with his usual calm demeanor, wearing a simple navy suit and that familiar smile that has charmed audiences for decades. The studio lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and everything seemed perfectly normal. He settled into the chair across from Savannah Guthrie, who sat there with her notes, flanked by Hoda Kotb and Craig Melvin on either side. The energy in the room felt tense from the start, but nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold. Savannah started with what seemed like a standard question. So Kevin, let's talk about your recent projects. Some people are saying you're past your prime. What do you say to that? The audience could hear the edge in her voice. This wasn't a question. This was a challenge. Kevin shifted in his seat, maintaining his composure, but you could see something flicker across his face. He took a breath and responded calmly. Well, Savannah, I think the work speaks for itself. I'm proud of everything I've done, and I'm excited about what's coming next. But Savannah wasn't done. She leaned forward, her expression almost mocking. That's a very diplomatic answer, but let's be real here. Your last few movies haven't exactly set the box office on fire, have they? At what point do you accept that maybe the audience has moved on? Hoda glanced sideways at Savannah, clearly uncomfortable. You could see her mouth open slightly, as if she wanted to interject, but she stayed silent. Craig shifted in his chair, looking down at his cards. Kevin's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. I've been in this industry for over 40 years. There are ups and downs for everyone. That's part of the business. What matters to me is telling stories that mean something. Savannah let out a small laugh, the kind that makes your skin crawl because you know it's not genuine. It was dismissive, cruel even. Stories that mean something? Kevin, your last film made less than $20 million. That's not a story that means something to audiences, clearly. The room went cold. Even the crew members behind the cameras exchanged glances. This wasn't journalism. This was a hit piece disguised as an interview. Kevin sat there, his hands folded in his lap, and you could see him processing what was happening. He wasn't angry yet, but the foundation was cracking. I respect your opinion, Savannah, but I disagree. Art isn't just about box office numbers. It's about the impact you have on people's lives, the connections you make. Savannah rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes on live television. Oh, here we go with the artist. Speech. Kevin, come on. You're a businessman, just like the rest of them. Don't pretend you're above caring about money and success. Hoda finally found her voice, jumping in with a softer tone. I think what Kevin is saying is that there's more to it than just the numbers, right, Kevin? I mean, we've all loved your work over the years. But Savannah cut her off, holding up a hand. Hoda, please, let me finish. She turned back to Kevin, and her next words were like gasoline on a spark. I have to ask, and I think our viewers want to know, do you ever look at younger actors today and feel irrelevant? Do you ever wonder if your time has simply passed? The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin stared at her, his eyes narrowing. Craig actually turned his head to look at Savannah with an expression of disbelief. This had crossed a line, and everyone in that studio knew it. Kevin spoke slowly, each word measured. That's an incredibly disrespectful question, Savannah. I came here to talk about my work, not to be insulted. Savannah shrugged, completely unbothered. I'm just asking what everyone's thinking. Isn't that what journalism is? Asking the tough questions? Tough questions. Kevin's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his calm exterior. There's a difference between tough questions and being deliberately rude. You're not interested in a conversation. You're interested in a spectacle. Savannah smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made your blood boil. Smug. Self-satisfied. I'm interested in the truth, Kevin. And the truth is, you're not the star you used to be. Why is it so hard for you to admit that? Hoda tried again, her voice more urgent this time. Savannah, maybe we should move on to something else. Kevin, tell us about your new project. But Kevin wasn't looking at Hoda. His eyes were locked on Savannah, and you could see the anger building behind them. You know what, Savannah? I've sat through a lot of interviews in my career. Some good, some bad. But this is something else entirely. You invited me here under the pretense of a professional conversation, and instead, you've spent the last several minutes trying to tear me down. Savannah leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I'm just doing my job, Kevin. If you can't handle a few hard questions, maybe you should reconsider doing interviews. That was it. That was the moment. Kevin's face flushed, and he stood up from his chair. The microphone pack clipped to his belt pulled at the wire, and he reached down to unclip it. Hard questions? You call that hard questions? That's not journalism, Savannah. That's cruelty dressed up as curiosity. Craig spoke up for the first time, his voice cautious. Hey, let's all just take a breath here. Kevin, please sit down. We can talk about this. But Kevin was done. He held the microphone in his hand, looking at all three of them. You know what the saddest part about this is? I actually respected this show. I respected what you all do here. But this? He gestured toward Savannah. This is embarrassing. Not for me. For you. Savannah's expression hardened. Are you seriously going to throw a tantrum because I asked you a few questions you didn't like? That's very professional, Kevin. Kevin let out a bitter laugh. A tantrum? I'm standing up for myself. Something you clearly wouldn't understand, given how you treat your guests. Do you talk to everyone like this, or am I just special? Hoda stood up now, trying to physically position herself between the tension. Kevin, please. Let's just take a moment. Savannah, maybe we went a little too far with some of those questions. Savannah shot Hoda a look that could freeze water. Don't apologize for me, Hoda. I stand by every question I asked. Kevin shook his head, his voice dripping with disappointment. Of course you do. Because you don't see anything wrong with what you just did. That's the problem. You sit up here on your platform, and you think you have the right to say whatever you want to people, to make them feel small, to question their worth. And for what? Ratings? Savannah stood up now too, her voice rising to match his. You're being incredibly dramatic, Kevin. I asked you about your career. That's literally what you're here to discuss. No, Kevin said firmly, pointing at her. You attacked my career. You questioned my relevance. You mocked my passion for my work. There's a difference between asking about someone's career and trying to humiliate them on national television. Craig tried one more time to intervene. Guys, we're still on air here. Let's just calm down and figure this out. But neither of them was listening. Savannah took a step closer to Kevin, her face twisted with indignation. You want to know what I think? I think you can't handle the fact that your star has faded. I think you came on this show expecting everyone to kiss your feet and tell you how wonderful you are. And when I didn't do that, you couldn't handle it. Kevin's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level. You don't know anything about me, Savannah. You don't know what I can or can't handle. What I can't handle is sitting here and being disrespected by someone who clearly has no interest in treating me like a human being. Savannah laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Oh, please. You're a celebrity. You chose this life. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. That's exactly what I'm doing, Kevin said, his voice cold and final. He placed the microphone on the chair where he'd been sitting. I'm getting out of your kitchen because it's toxic, and I want no part of it. Hoda reached out, her hand almost touching Kevin's arm. Kevin, wait. Please don't leave like this. We can fix this. Kevin looked at her, and his expression softened just slightly. Hoda, you seem like a kind person, but I can't stay here. Not after this. He looked at Craig. You too, Craig. I hope you both find a better working environment someday. Then he turned back to Savannah, and the disappointment in his eyes was crushing. I hope whatever you got out of this was worth it. I really do. Because you just burned a bridge with someone who came here in good faith, and that says a lot more about you than it ever will about me. Savannah's face was red now, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Fine. Walk away. That's what people do when they can't defend themselves. They run. Kevin stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one last time. I'm not running, Savannah. I'm choosing not to participate in whatever this is. There's a difference, and if you can't see that, then I truly feel sorry for you. The cameras captured every second as Kevin Costner walked off the Today Show set. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. The crew members stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Hoda had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Craig was staring at his notes, clearly trying to process what had just happened. And Savannah? She stood there in the middle of the set, her chest heaving, her face a mask of defiance and something else. Maybe embarrassment, maybe anger. It was hard to tell. As Kevin disappeared through the studio doors, Savannah turned to the camera, trying to regain her composure. Well, that was unexpected. We'll be right back after this break. But her voice wavered, just slightly. Just enough to betray that even she knew she'd gone too far. The moment the cameras cut, the set erupted into chaos. Producers rushed onto the stage. Hoda immediately turned to Savannah, her voice urgent and upset. What was that? What were you thinking? Savannah's facade cracked for just a moment. I was doing my job, Hoda. Don't start with me right now. Craig stood up, pulling off his own microphone. That wasn't your job, Savannah. That was an ambush. We all knew it. The whole country just watched you dismantle a guest for no reason. A producer approached, his face pale. We need to figure out how to handle this. That's going to be everywhere in about 5 minutes. Savannah waved him off, but her hand was shaking. Handle what? I asked tough questions. If he couldn't handle it, that's on him. Hoda shook her head, her voice breaking. Those weren't tough questions, Savannah. They were mean. They were designed to hurt him, and you know it. For a brief second, Savannah's mask slipped completely. You could see it in her eyes, the realization of what she'd just done. But then she pulled herself together, straightening her jacket. I'm not apologizing for doing my job. Craig walked away, shaking his head. That wasn't your job. That was ego. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as the crew scrambled to prepare for the next segment. Savannah sat back down in her chair, alone now, staring straight ahead. The confidence she'd displayed just moments ago was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Regret? Defensiveness? Pride wounded by the truth? Meanwhile, somewhere outside that studio, Kevin Costner was probably sitting in a car or a dressing room, processing what had just happened. A man who had spent 4 decades building a career on dignity and respect, reduced to walking off a stage because someone had decided that tearing him down would make for good television. The interview that was supposed to last 20 minutes had imploded in less than 10. What was supposed to be a friendly promotional appearance had turned into a masterclass in how not to treat another human being, let alone a guest on your show. The entire incident played out like a slow-motion car crash. You could see it coming, but you couldn't look away. From that first pointed question about being past his prime to the final moment, when Kevin placed that microphone on the chair and walked away, every second was filled with escalating tension. Savannah had pushed and pushed, each question more cutting than the last. She'd questioned his relevance, mocked his passion, dismissed his accomplishments, and treated him like a relic from a bygone era. And for what? To prove she could? To show she wasn't afraid to ask the hard questions? Or was it something darker? something more personal. Kevin, for his part, had shown remarkable restraint. He'd tried to answer diplomatically. He'd tried to redirect the conversation. He'd tried to maintain his composure even as Savannah lobbed one insult after another, disguised as journalism. But everyone has a breaking point, and Savannah had found his. The moment he stood up, you could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't a celebrity throwing a tantrum. This was a man who had been pushed beyond reason, who had been disrespected to a point where staying would have meant accepting that treatment as normal. And he refused. He absolutely refused. His words cut deeper than any of Savannah's questions could have. You don't know anything about me. This is embarrassing. Not for me, for you. I hope you both find a better working environment someday. Each sentence was measured, controlled, and devastating in its honesty. And Savannah's responses? They revealed everything. The eye roll, the dismissive laughter, the accusation that he was being dramatic, the suggestion that he couldn't handle criticism. Every reaction showed a complete lack of self-awareness, a refusal to see how far over the line she'd stepped. When Hoda and Craig tried to intervene, their discomfort was palpable. These were professionals who understood the difference between asking difficult questions and attacking a guest. They could see what was happening, and they tried to stop it, but Savannah wouldn't be stopped. She was committed to her path. Consequences be damned. The visual of Kevin walking away, his back straight, his head held high, was powerful. He didn't storm off in anger. He didn't throw anything, or curse, or make a scene. He simply removed himself from a situation that had become untenable. It was dignified. It was final. It was the only response that made sense. And Savannah's attempt to maintain control as he left, her voice calling after him about running away, about not being able to defend himself, only made her look worse. Because everyone watching knew the truth. Kevin wasn't running. He was choosing his self-respect over a paycheck, over publicity, over all of it. The aftermath on set, with Hoda confronting Savannah, with Craig walking away, with the producer panicking, painted a picture of a workplace in crisis. This wasn't just about one bad interview. This was about a culture that had allowed this kind of behavior to happen in the first place. Savannah's refusal to apologize, her insistence that she was just doing her job, rang hollow. Because nobody watching that interview thought she was doing her job. They saw someone abusing their position, using their platform to belittle someone who had come in good faith. The contrast between the two of them couldn't have been starker. Kevin, gracious even in his anger, pointing out the cruelty while still maintaining his dignity. Savannah, defensive and aggressive, unable or unwilling to see how her actions had created this disaster. What made it even more powerful was Kevin's empathy for Hoda and Craig. Even in the midst of his justified anger at Savannah, he took the time to acknowledge them, to express hope for them. That's the mark of someone who understands that not everyone in that room was responsible for what happened. His final words to Savannah carried the weight of profound disappointment. I hope whatever you got out of this was worth it. It wasn't said with anger. It was said with sadness. The sadness of someone who had expected better and been let down. The image of Savannah standing alone on that set after he left, trying to regain her composure for the camera, was almost tragic. Almost. Because unlike Kevin, who had lost nothing but time, Savannah had lost something much more valuable. She'd lost credibility. She'd lost the moral high ground. She'd lost the respect of her colleagues and her audience. The break in her voice as she said, "We'll be right back after this break," betrayed everything her words tried to hide. She knew. Deep down, she knew she'd made a terrible mistake. But her pride wouldn't let her admit it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This wasn't just a clash between a host and a guest. It was a clash between two fundamentally different approaches to human interaction. Kevin believed in respect, in dignity, in treating people with basic kindness. Savannah, at least in that moment, believed in the supremacy of her position, in her right to ask anything and say anything without regard for the person sitting across from her. The fact that this all happened in less than 10 minutes made it even more shocking. In the span of a normal commercial break, an entire relationship had been destroyed, a reputation had been damaged, and a moment of television history had been created for all the wrong reasons. Every person watching that interview had to ask themselves what they would have done in Kevin's position. Would they have stayed and endured more? Would they have fought back harder? Or would they have done exactly what he did, recognized the situation for what it was, and removed themselves from it with as much grace as possible? The answer for most people, if they were honest, would be that they hoped they'd have the strength to do what Kevin did, to stand up, to speak truth, to walk away when walking away was the only dignified option left. And what about Savannah's position? Could anyone honestly say they would have conducted that interview the way she did? Would they have been so relentlessly cruel, so dismissive of someone's feelings, so convinced of their own righteousness that they couldn't see the harm they were causing? The questions lingered long after Kevin had left the building. What had Savannah hoped to accomplish? What had driven her to treat a guest that way? Was it personal? Was it professional? Was it just a spectacularly bad day where every wrong decision compounded into catastrophe? The interview would be dissected for years to come, but in the moment, on that set, with the cameras still rolling and the crew still reeling, the only thing that mattered was the empty chair where Kevin had been sitting and the microphone he'd left behind. That microphone, lying there on the seat, became a symbol of a conversation that should have happened but didn't. A symbol of respect that was demanded but not given. A symbol of a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Kevin Costner had walked onto that set as a guest, as a colleague in the entertainment industry, as a human being deserving of basic courtesy. He'd walked off that set as all of those things still, but also as someone who had been tested and had passed that test by refusing to compromise his self-worth. Savannah Guthrie had started that interview as a host, as a journalist, as someone in a position of power. She'd ended it in the same position technically, but the power had shifted. Because real power doesn't come from a title, or a desk, or a camera. Real power comes from how you treat people when you have every advantage. The whole thing played out like a Greek tragedy, with hubris leading inevitably to downfall. Except in this version, the person who fell wasn't the one who walked away. It was the one who stayed behind, standing in the wreckage of what should have been a simple, pleasant conversation, forced to confront what her choices had created. In those 46 seconds that started it all, Savannah had made a choice. She could have been kind. She could have been professional. She could have asked real questions that challenged without demeaning. Instead, she chose condescension. She chose cruelty. She chose to see how far she could push before something broke. And something did break. Not Kevin. He remained intact, whole, dignified. What broke was the illusion that the way she was conducting that interview was acceptable, was normal, was just part of the job. Kevin's departure shattered that illusion for everyone watching. The studio audience, silent throughout most of the exchange, had witnessed something they'd never forget. They'd come expecting the usual morning show fare, light and breezy and forgettable. Instead, they'd seen a real human moment, raw and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. As Kevin's footsteps faded and the studio doors closed behind him, everyone left behind had to sit with what had just happened. The producers had to figure out how to fill the rest of the show. The crew had to reset for the next segment. Hoda and Craig had to find a way to continue working alongside someone who had just created a public relations nightmare. And Savannah had to live with the knowledge that she'd done this. Not the network, not the producers, not some faceless executive. Her questions, her tone, her choices. This was hers to own, whether she wanted to or not. The beautiful thing, if anything about this situation could be called beautiful, was that Kevin had given her every opportunity to course correct. He'd been patient. He'd tried to answer gracefully. He'd given her openings to soften the approach, to pivot to something more constructive. She'd ignored every single one. It was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral when one person refuses to show basic human decency, and another person refuses to accept being treated poorly. Two immovable forces colliding, and only one of them coming out with their integrity intact. The interview that never finished became more famous than any interview that had. People would talk about it not for what was said about Kevin's career, but for what it revealed about the culture of celebrity journalism, about power dynamics, about the importance of treating people with respect regardless of their current box office numbers. Kevin Costner walked off that set, and in doing so, he walked into a different kind of spotlight. Not the one Savannah had tried to put him under, harsh and unforgiving, but one of his own making, where his actions spoke louder than any defense he could have offered. The doors closed, the microphone sat silent on the chair, and somewhere a chapter ended while another one began.